Magpie OAO says, is the Greek Septuagint considered a flawed copy? The genealogy of Shem adds hundreds of years, which is quite significant. Is the MT inerrant, or am I misunderstanding inerrancy? Thanks. Okay. Just framing this for people, anybody who doesn't know, when we say Septuagint, Greek Septuagint, that's just a way of saying there's this like these Greek copies of the Old Testament that were translated into Greek over a period of time. And we have them. They're very, very old copies of the Old Testament, and they're in Greek, not Hebrew or Aramaic or any other of the languages we see in the Old Testament. Then we have what's called the MT, or the Masoretic Text. And the Masoretic Text has been kind of the standard text you actually get your Old Testament from, and it's in Hebrew. Now, the Masoretic Text, the oldest copies we had of that up until recently were like 900 AD. Like, that's not that old, really, for something that was written before the New Testament. But when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, in like the 1940s, 1948, I think it was, they discovered these ancient scrolls that push back the Masoretic Text dating like 1,000 years. And it shows a well-preserved text, and that it's very trustworthy and reliable. So the question you have about these is, hey, you know, there's places where the Greek Septuagint is different than the Masoretic Text. Should we consider the Greek flawed? And you give an example, the genealogy of Shem adds hundreds of years, which is quite significant. I think that there isn't a pat answer for this. Magpie, I'm going to speak as someone I'm not a textual critic. I care about these things a lot. I try to look into them myself as well. So here's my opinion on this. That there isn't a pat answer. That you, with textual criticism, what you do is you look at the Masoretic Text, you look at the Septuagint, you look at both of them, and you think about it in each case, in each verse, in each comparison. And the Septuagint isn't just one thing. It's not like one group sat down and translated the entire Old Testament at one time, and they had the same reliability all through that translation. That it's not the way it is. It was translated. There's a debate about it, right? How spread out it was, how much of the Septuagint was written in this time versus translated at a later time, versus some unlikely belief that it was done by 70 scholars all at one time, with some kind of miraculous help. Like, that's probably not historically what happened, from what I understand. So you just look at each one. You look at each one. I think in general, if you had to have it just a generalization, I think the Masoretic Text is generally looked at as more reliable than the Septuagint. I know individually in passages where I look up, well, the Septuagint says this. When I have looked up specific things where it's a debate, whether it's an apologetics or theology, I usually end up going, yeah, I'm not going with the Septuagint here. When I look up a specific thing and I read, textual criticism stuff on that particular passage, like say Isaiah 53, I'm not going with the Septuagint on Isaiah 53. Now, here's what's interesting. Isaiah 53 in the Septuagint has things that tone down what we would call the doctrine of penal substitutionary atonement. That, which is an important doctrine. It's an understanding of the cross, part of the understanding of the cross, along with other things like the moral elements of the cross and other atonement things that go on there. So what's interesting is the New Testament authors, whenever they quote the Septuagint, the Isaiah 53, they do not quote the Septuagint. They either provide their own translation or they have a different translation than what we see in the Septuagint. So that's just an interesting thing, at least for Isaiah 53, that you can consider. Is the Masoretic Text inerrant, you ask? I would say that we don't look typically at any copy as being inerrant. The belief in inerrancy is belief that the originals are inerrant. And whatever copy you're looking at, Masoretic, right? And even in the Masoretic, there's some different versions of Masoretic where there's like slight differences. And the job of scholars is to look at these and go, what does the original say? Because guess what? We believe the original is inerrant. We don't believe that means God makes so that nobody who copies can ever make a mistake. We believe the original is inerrant. So as much as as any text, represents the original, there's inerrancy. Now, this might make you feel worried, right? For those maybe who are listening who are going, oh, I don't really know much about this. Now I'm wondering if I can trust the Bible at all. Oh, you're totally overreacting. Like, let me just tell you, I've been there, okay? But you're totally overreacting. You can totally relax. We have great confidence about the original writing of what we have in the scripture. That's the short version of the story. If you want the long version, I point you to my Evidence for the Bible series. I'll put a playlist below that has like a few videos in it that are all about this issue where I get into a bunch of detail. That's for follow-up for anybody. I will link that below afterwards.